What if the most brilliant minds in history weren't destroyed by their enemies, their addictions, or their reputations, but by a microscopic killer hiding in their bloodstream? What if the genius, madness, and tragedy behind some of the most iconic figures we celebrate today were shaped not by destiny, but by an infection nobody dared speak out loud? For centuries, history has airbrushed its legends. We've built statues, written biographies, and recited heroic summaries that make their stories feel complete. But behind those polished lines and carefully curated narratives lies a haunting truth. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, leaders, and artists were quietly suffering from a disease wrapped in secrecy, stigma, and denial. Syphilis wasn't just another illness, it was the silent destroyer of the ambitious and the gifted. Before antibiotics, it was rampant among elites, especially those whose lifestyles collided with danger, decadence, and desire. Diagnoses were hidden. Medical records were edited. Certificates were rewritten. Doctors colluded with families to bury the truth. The public was told about alcoholism, exhaustion, heartbreak, anything except the real cause. And that silence rewrote history. A medical historian once described syphilis as the great imitator, a disease whose late-stage symptoms are so deceptive they mirror mental illness, addiction, madness, or simply the eccentricities of brilliance. Paranoia, memory loss, hallucinations, drastic personality changes, these weren't the quirks of genius. They were neurological destruction. The people we'll talk about today shaped culture, business, literature, film, crime, and technology. Yet they all shared a hidden torment. Their downfall wasn't fate, it was untreated infection. Let's pull back the curtain on 6 extraordinary lives and examine the secret disease that demolished them from the inside out. Al Capone, the gangster king struck down by an invisible assassin. I came to Chicago with $40 in my pocket. My son is now 12. I'm still married, and I love my wife. Those were the words of Al Capone, a man who built an empire through brilliance as much as brutality. For years, he controlled Chicago with a grip so tight that even the federal government struggled to break it. Rivals feared him. Politicians bowed to him. The police were either on his payroll or too scared to challenge him. His operations pulled in what would be more than $1.5 billion a year today. He was untouchable until something much smaller than any gangster finally got him. Capone didn't fall because of bullets. He didn't fall because of betrayals. He didn't fall because the law outsmarted him. Capone fell because of syphilis. Most stories end Capone's saga with prison and tax charges. But that's not where the tragedy lies. His real collapse began after Alcatraz, when neurological syphilis ate away at his mind until he functioned like a child. The man who once ran an empire couldn't count simple numbers. The mastermind who orchestrated multi-million-dollar operations could barely follow a conversation. Prison doctors had discovered his syphilis years earlier. They noted early signs of paresis, the brain damage that would define his final years. But treatment came too late. By 1945, the fearsome Capone believed he was fishing in his swimming pool. He spoke to people who weren't there. His mental world had collapsed into confusion and hallucination. He died in 1947, officially from stroke and pneumonia, but the underlying cause was the infection he likely caught as a teenager, now in its final, devastating stage. The cruel twist. Only a few years later, penicillin became widely available. A simple treatment would have saved him completely. The man who survived rivals, shootouts, and federal agents was defeated by a microscopic, spiral-shaped bacterium. Howard Hughes, when genius mutated into chaos. Now imagine a man who seemed capable of anything. Aviation pioneer, Hollywood producer, engineering prodigy, billionaire visionary. Howard Hughes wasn't just successful, he was relentless, magnetic, and almost superhuman in ambition. But then something went horribly wrong. His brilliance warped into paranoia, his confidence dissolved into obsessive rituals. The handsome, charismatic innovator deteriorated into a skeletal recluse weighing only 90 pounds. His fingernails grew grotesquely long. He isolated himself in dark rooms for months. He wrote obsessively detailed instructions about trivial tasks, terrified of contamination. People blamed eccentricity. They blamed trauma. They blamed OCD. And certainly Hughes struggled with mental health. But a growing body of medical evidence suggests something else entirely. Untreated syphilis may have been the catalyst that flipped his mind from genius to madness. A neuropsychiatrist who studied Hughes's case once said his symptoms were textbook neurosyphilis. The paranoia, the compulsive routines, the cognitive decline, the physical wasting. All of it matched the disease's neurological assault. Hughes lived a life of intense sexual activity during the roaring Hollywood age, when syphilis was common and often undiagnosed. His immune system fought for years, but slowly the infection may have reached his brain, and once it did, the unraveling began. Doctors around him weren't true medical authorities, they were employees. They obeyed him. They feared contradicting him. If he refused testing or treatment, nobody dared push back. So the disease, if he had it, progressed unchecked. By the time he died, in 1976, he was almost unrecognizable. Billion-dollar wealth couldn't save him from the infection that kept tightening its grip on his mind and body. If this theory is true, then Hughes, the man who reshaped aviation and Hollywood, was undone by a disease that today could be cured with a few injections. John Barrymore, the great profile's tragic unraveling. John Barrymore wasn't just an actor, he was acting royalty. His Shakespearean performances were legendary. His charisma made him one of early Hollywood's brightest stars. But then something changed. Quickly, people blamed alcohol for his collapse, and yes, he drank heavily. But many biographers and medical historians now believe something else accelerated his decline: neurosyphilis. For decades, Barrymore lived fast, charming everyone around him. He had countless affairs during an era when syphilis circulated heavily in theatrical communities. And like many men of his time, he likely ignored symptoms or received incomplete treatment. His cognitive decline didn't follow the usual pattern of alcoholism. It was sharper, faster, more devastating. He forgot lines he had once delivered flawlessly from memory. Productions hired assistants whose sole job was whispering cues to him. His behavior became unpredictable. He swung from sharp brilliance to heartbreaking confusion within minutes. By the early 1940s, he could barely work. Films cleverly edited around his worsening condition to hide how far he'd fallen. His official cause of death lists kidney and liver damage, but medical analysts argue those diagnoses alone don't explain the sheer collapse of his mind. Neurosyphilis does. His family had every reason to hide the truth. The Barrymores were a dynasty. Syphilis carried enormous shame. Alcohol was an easier explanation. His downfall became one of Hollywood's earliest tragedies, a star extinguished not by scandal, not by ego, but by a disease no one dared name. Paul Muni, the chameleon actor who disappeared. Paul Muni was a different kind of legend, an intense, transformative actor who demanded artistic depth and rejected Hollywood glamour entirely. He earned an Oscar and immense respect for his ability to lose himself inside every role. But then, as his fame peaked, something strange happened. He withdrew. He rejected scripts without explanation. He forgot lines, unthinkable for an actor whose preparation was once flawless. He grew unpredictable. He complained of pain and confusion. And eventually, he retreated from Hollywood altogether. Official biographies insist arthritis and heart issues caused the decline. But many who worked with him believed something neurological was happening, something no one wanted to acknowledge publicly. Muni grew up in theatrical circles during a time when syphilis was widespread. His symptoms, joint pain, cognitive lapses, personality changes, closely resembled tertiary syphilis, especially neurosyphilis. The timeline fits, the behavior fits, the unexplained retirement fits. Was it syphilis? No one can say with certainty. The records were likely sanitized, but the clues form a compelling pattern. For an actor renowned for control, discipline, and precision, his chaotic final years feel like a tragic break from the man he once was. Oscar Wilde, the brilliant wit undone in exile. Oscar Wilde reshaped literature with elegance, satire, wit, and devastating social insight. His plays and prose were unmatched in charm, depth, and linguistic brilliance. But his final years, they were filled with suffering. Wilde's health collapsed rapidly after his imprisonment. While harsh prison conditions weakened him, many scholars now believe Wilde also suffered from tertiary syphilis, a condition he may have contracted decades before through heterosexual encounters at university, long before the scandal that defined his downfall. This disease would explain the severe ear infections, neurological symptoms, and meningitis that ultimately killed him. In Paris, friends described a man physically destroyed yet mentally fierce. His humor survived even as his body failed. His famous final quip, "One of us has to go," referring to the wallpaper, is remembered as a symbol of his resilience. But beneath that charm, his body was losing its battle against decades of silent damage. He died at 46, a mind that brilliant should have had decades more to give. The irony is almost literary. The author of The Picture of Dorian Gray, a novel about hidden decay beneath a beautiful facade, may have been dying from a hidden disease eating him from within. Edgar Allan Poe, the master of madness, consumed by his own mystery. No writer understood psychological terror better than Edgar Allan Poe. His stories explored paranoia, hallucinations, madness, and the fragile line between reality and nightmare. But his own death, it mirrored his darkest tales. Poe was found delirious on a Baltimore street, wearing someone else's clothes, unable to say where he'd been. His final days were filled with hallucinations, agitation, and disorientation. After 4 days of unbroken delirium, he died, still calling out for Reynolds, a person who has never been identified. Autopsy records are incomplete. His death certificate lists brain inflammation, a vague and often sanitized label. So what really happened? Medical researchers pointing to neurosyphilis argue that his symptoms match the disease almost perfectly, especially the delirium, memory problems, hypersensitivity to alcohol, and emotional instability observed in his final years. His extremely low alcohol tolerance, often mistaken for alcoholism, is actually common among neurosyphilis patients, and the timeline of his cognitive changes matches the progression of untreated syphilis as well. Whether or not he suffered from the disease, the theory explains the mystery in a way no other explanation fully has. It also raises a haunting question. Did the mental states Poe wrote about come not just from imagination, but from personal experience with neurological decline, the disease that secretly shaped history. These 6 lives, Capone, Hughes, Barrymore, Muni, Wilde, and Poe, are only the beginning. Syphilis played a hidden role in art, politics, business, literature, and entertainment. It influenced reputations, shaped legacies, destroyed careers, and ended lives prematurely, all because stigma prevented open discussion. Doctors avoided diagnosing it. Families hid it. Biographers softened it. Historians ignored it. The tragedy is that many of these figures lived during eras when treatment existed, yet shame kept them from seeking it. People feared the judgment more than the disease itself, and so countless geniuses lived and died misunderstood. Penicillin changed everything, turning a fatal illness into a treatable infection. Had these figures been born decades later, their endings might have been dramatically different. How many books never got written? How many films never got made? How many inventions never reached the world? How many legends lost the final chapters of their brilliance? The cultural loss is immeasurable. History is often told as a sequence of heroic choices and tragic flaws. But sometimes, the turning point isn't a decision. It's a disease no one wanted to talk about, and the silence changed everything.